One. Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good, presented by Betches Media. Today, we are updating a story. We've talked about him on the show a bunch of times now, but Sean P. Diddy Combs. There is a stunning 4-part docuseries that ID Discovery has put out. 2 parts tonight, this Monday night, and 2 parts on Tuesday. You can stream on Max as well. It's called The Fall of Diddy, and this thing is just so researched, so detailed. The talking heads in this are just so powerful because it's not only a story about victims, it's a story about survivors, and it is exhaustive in its research. It has archival footage, personal insights, all of these allegations that I had forgotten through the decades we have known Sean Combs through the media and pop culture. So a big trigger warning on this conversation, depending on, you never know where it's going to go, but I want to tell you there is so many serious allegations talked about in this docuseries. We have 2 of the people behind this docuseries here with us today. Emma Schwartz, who was also responsible for the 5-part docuseries about Nickelodeon Quiet on Set, which we covered last year, and acclaimed director Yoruba Richen, who also did Black and Missing, which I highly recommend, and it's also streaming on Max. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I was just stunned. I watched all 4 of these back to back, and it was such a feeling that washed over me of following this man in the media for decades and still like almost forgetting certain elements of his life and forgetting how many allegations had been brought forth that kind of just disappeared in our memories over time. And this really puts it all out there. And at the same point, I'm like, you could probably do another 4-part docuseries, sadly. How do you go about determining which is in these 4 parts? Because the first part opens with the Cassie incident, which we saw the hotel video released by CNN. How did you guys break this down of what each part would represent?
It's a big question.
I know, but it's like you're covering so much. I just kept wondering, how do you break this down? Because I would imagine you would be shocked as well once you started digging into the research of how many things there were to cover.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, one thing I'll just start off by saying is that it was also and is also an unfolding story, right? So that also shaped and changed what we included and what we didn't include, and what we included when and where and how. But I'll let Emma start. It was a massive beast. And it was, like
sorry, we just had a visitor. We had a special guest appear in the
special
interview
guest
for a second.
appearance. I'm going to lock my door for 1 moment, please.
But just a massive, undertaking to tell the story of who Sean Combs, Diddy, Love, P. Diddy, is, his influence, what he meant to the culture, his tentacles in all different parts of the culture, not only in music, but in business and fashion and branding and television. And then also tell these stories of the alleged incidents and events that happen to the people that we feature in these stories, going back, as you see, for decades.
Yeah, I mean, you had Tim Patterson, his childhood friend that lived with him, which was just amazing to hear from him. Also, the Howard University. I mean, you really take us through his life. And I do also want to say, to credit, like, you credit him, you give him his flowers for what he represented. And you had this great talking head at the end where somebody had mentioned he made hip hop seem so vital to American culture that everyone wanted to be a piece of it. And I think that is such a key because we want to believe in something. And I thought that was the thing that is so seductive and alluring for all of us to want to emulate this man. And then behind the scenes, his demons just kept growing through the decades and through the power. Was that something that was like obvious to you from the start?
Well, I think, we started, looking into this space. We had people sort of in the universe raising questions even before Cassie's lawsuit had happened. And after her lawsuit was filed, it sort of became a tipping point where we said, this is a moment where people are starting to speak more. Stories that we didn't think were accessible were now more likely to have people feel a bit more comfortable. And, I think part of what we wanted to sort of understand was how he, how far back things went and how far into the present things have gone. And, very quickly, we were hearing stories that went into the way back, right? Stories into understanding his childhood, stories about Howard University, stories about, the early days. And what I think was surprising in some ways is, as we went through this process, of, meeting people and getting to know people, things would happen. There were the federal raids. We were already filming before that happened. We were filming the day that the hotel surveillance video dropped.
Emma, that's what I was going to say. I was doing research and I was like, you were already filming talking head interviews the day the Cassie video dropped. And so that just shows you guys were already deep in production on this before that happened, which I thought was like the thing that broke this case wide open. Like Cassie was, but it was so interesting. You guys were already on this story before that dropped.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as these events were happening, if you've been in his orbit, if you've experienced something, each of these moments would trigger different people to say, okay, now I need to speak up, or, oh, I didn't realize it was this bad, or wow, right? Like I didn't want to believe until I saw something, right? And, different people then would want to speak, or people that we didn't expect would speak, all the way to the point where, shortly after that video, Diddy put out his own, apology video, saying this was sort of the worst moment for him. But, over the course of the months that followed, we, talked to other people, including who you see in the documentary, Kat Passion, who, was involved with him after Cassie. And so it raises a lot of questions about just how recent a lot of these alleged behaviors have continued.
Yeah, and I was thinking too is that this is somebody very comfortable with the legal system. He has been in this orbit now for decades, and there were things, and I just, this was the part that was stunning. Like I mentioned this, studying pop culture for decades, you do forget about these things. Like I had kind of Eternal Sunshine, the Jennifer Lopez incident in the club with the gun that was actually went to trial. I forgot about Shine, the rapper, that actually, had to go to prison. Diddy and his security guard gets off through the trial, but Shine goes to prison, who was like signed to Bad Boy Records. And then what was interesting is that he was acquitted, and everybody was like for him, like, yes, we did it. And that's the only difference I feel like now, where he has lost public support, where through the decades, even with the basketball game incident, one of the first things that he was, accused of, the public does not support Diddy anymore. I would think the vast majority at this moment. Would you agree?
Well, one thing I wanted to say about remembering, these events. I remember growing up in New York, I remember the CCNY event. For some reason, I have a very vivid memory of being on my bed in my childhood bedroom, listening to a report about it. But then so many years later, understanding what actually went on, how many people were hurt, how many people were killed. It was shocking to me. And it was shocking to me, hearing remembering the 99 shooting and all that transpired, the whole J-Lo thing, but then hearing the details from people who were obviously victims and a part of it. I think that, there's something in our society where when you get away with something or get off, or, and then you're able to rebrand yourself, you're able to fix your image. This is not just with Combs. I think we see it with people in all different positions. And then we, allow it to, allow them to amass and to continue amass power, amass money. And in Combs' case, this hid a lot of the other stuff that was going on that was, allegedly much worse than what we saw in the public eye.
we want to believe in heroes. We want to believe that, in this almighty thing that we can try to obtain. Like, could I obtain a fraction of his success? Could I be a hard worker? Like, I was thinking about how many times I was inspired by, I remember the MTV where he was training for the marathon, and they did I remember that going, wow, this guy is a beast, and in a positive way. I was like, this guy is just all consuming about getting this goal done, not knowing this dark side. But the CCNY thing, I just want to point out to people, that was the City College celebrity basketball game that he promoted when he was up and coming, and he oversold the tickets. So there was a stampede, and many people lost their lives. We didn't really know the details, like you said. Like, this is why this kind of docuseries is important, because it really tells the details. It talks to victims' families. Like, you see how many people were actually hurt. And I think the question viewers will keep asking themselves is, wait, how did it go on for this long? If this happened, the lawsuit, and that happened, and then the Shine incident happened, and there were, like you said, there were so many lawsuits piling up that we never heard about. How was this able to keep happening? Was it just money and influence?
I think that was a big part of it. Money can cover up a lot of stuff. Money can keep things out of the public eye. And when there's also, even with his names, right? Multiple names, multiple rebranding. I mean, he says it himself in some of the archive footage. I want to get away from Puff Daddy. That has a negative connotation. So there's a way that he remakes himself, rebrands himself. And again, I think that is a very American thing that we see, not just with Diddy. And I also wanted to just quickly say that, we do want to believe in heroes. We do want to believe in, up from the bootstraps, which he really, was.
Yes.
Made his way, reshaped the music hip hop industry, brought in, was part of making hip hop mainstream. We have to remember that only 5-6 years earlier, MTV wasn't even playing Black music as a policy. So we don't even remember that. So what he did in bringing hip hop to the mainstream was huge. And for African Americans specifically, we have even fewer of those heroes, fewer of those billionaires, which he became, which makes it even, more painful, harder to understand and to really take in, what these allegations and what we see in front of our eyes.
Emma, what were you about to say?
No, to that point, I think, so many people we spoke with, described his talent and his strength, right, was in shaping brands, in shaping image, in the charisma that he brought into a room. He could make you believe in anything. And that allowed him to create this incredible empire. But it also allowed him an amount of power over people to believe what he wanted you to believe about him.
Yeah. And as you point out, the new allegations, and he is behind bars right now, and he has not been granted parole, even though they've tried multiple times, is that he has now a track record of intimidating witnesses, of bribery. So why would you allow somebody to be out on bail when we have this now? They should just show the fall of Diddy to the potential jury pool. And this is something that I think will keep coming up. And I was also curious, and, I think his lawyers, they finally talked about this docuseries last week and just said, oh, this is just a cash grab. This is this or this. How did you respond to that? Because I thought it was, obviously what you would expect from Diddy's lawyers. But was there any fear for you guys tackling this subject because of the history that he has?
Look, I think we're really proud of the work that we put out there and of all of the bravery of the people who came forward. It's never easy to speak on camera, to speak about traumatic events, especially on camera. And, no matter the story, it takes a lot of courage. And I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful for everyone who did. And, it's more difficult when a story is unfolding because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Do you agree, Yoruba?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every story has, potential repercussions and, especially being an investigative journalist, Emma's done, a lot of investigative work. So you have to be careful, and you have to make sure as much as you can, everyone around you that you're working with, is safe and feels comfortable, and that the people who are speaking out do as well. And we, did that as much, to the nth percent.
Yeah. Sorry, what was that, Emma?
I'll just sort of add, and I think, one thing that's also, I think, really important to the work that we do is, try to separate fact from fiction, right? In big stories, all sorts of, things can run around. And, what we really tried to do is to focus on places where we could verify, where we could vet, where we could trust in the stories that we were sharing with the public as well.
Yeah. There are so many decades covered in this, but I also wanted to bring up, since this is a pop culture show, obviously Making the Band and Danity Kane we have talked about. And you guys have, one of the members of Danity Kane doing talking heads in this. And I just... I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my note here about this. But the Aubrey O'Day of it all, it gets brought up in this, where even, we saw it on Making the Band. We saw him like, don't eat this cheeseburger. That's, you're going to be fat, da, 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 da. And then it gets to a point where, he was harassing her sexually and saying like, you look good enough where I could possibly have sex with you now. Like, it was that dark, and we didn't kind of... I don't know, all this stuff that we just didn't think was going on behind the scenes. Was there any piece of talking head footage that you captured that you were like, that shocked you?
I think for me in that section, first off, Dee Woods, who we interviewed, was so, that part is so devastating, and it's so, she was so honest and raw. The fact that Danity Kane was a incredibly popular band. These young women were working to to fulfill their dreams. This was their dream chance, and that the way that they were treated, you mentioned some of the incidences, is just shameful and horrible. And it was right there. A lot of it, yes, some of it was behind closed doors, but a lot of it was right there on television, and people accepted this kind of treatment. I mean, that's another thing to me that is really shocking, and watching that footage and seeing how the treatment was allowed to happen for these, young women who were working to fulfill their dreams, and were treated like that. So going back to that footage is really, one of the things that's most shocking to me.
Yeah, and these are pop culture moments that we remember, but we remember them in a different way. We remember them as this entertaining little things that we watched and laughed at, and now we realize how destructive they were, and the behind the scenes stuff, like, to provide context. You look at those things in a completely different light, and he has so many incidents, like the white parties and these parties that he threw, and they were all about like excellence and black excellence, and then it got to a point that it was like the after party, and things got darker and darker. And it was so interesting because you do focus on his childhood and his dad, Melvin, who we find out later was affiliated with, a drug lord, I believe, in New York, a very famous one. And, he got killed, I believe, in a drug operation of some sort. And you can only imagine what that would do to a young boy. And Tim, his childhood best friend, says this guy was dressing like the sharpest kid. You wouldn't see a kid dressed like this. He had the hat. You have pictures of him. And that actually led to bullying. So Diddy got bullied ruthlessly, and his mom would be like, you don't get bullied. How dare you, got to hit back harder. And you can start to start to see where he was shaped in these kind of really odd, weird ways. But that's not to excuse his behavior, but I think it's important that you guys covered that part of the story. Was that like, yeah, we've got to cover this to show where we go?
Absolutely.
Everyone has an origin story, and it shapes you. It doesn't excuse you, but it shapes you. And it seems from the folks that we've talked to that, despite being someone who's publicly so, powerful, celebrated, charismatic, there's a deep, deep insecurity inside of him, and demons that we've seen come out in all sorts of ways. And, a lot of that can go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, and I was fascinated about that. I mean, there are so many things that are so, and you have so many talking heads. Like you have his personal chef from 2007 to 2010, Jordan. You have Natanya Griffin, who was the actual victim of the shooting incident with Shine and J-Lo, which was so interesting, but also interesting in the way that people reacted to her at the time. She was made fun of on radio stations. She was like, they were like playing gunshots in the bass on like morning radio, and like people were against her, like you're trying to take Diddy down. Like they didn't side with her, they sided with Diddy. She'd been shot in the face.
Yeah. Yeah. Incredible. Yeah. And devastating and so hurtful, and something that has scarred her, obviously, to this day. And again, I also just want to point out, we've seen this in our society when people are victims, when people are, speaking out against the powerful, that they're the ones who get made fun of, who get dismissed, who get, who are doubted. This is, again, I think it's something that's not just in this story, but obviously we're telling this story with Diddy and Natanya. That was 30 years ago, and it's still so painful for her, of course.
Well, that's what I mean. It just shows you the scars that we all keep with us, is that like, we expect people to treat us with a basic human decency, or you expect there to be rules or guardrails on behavior and wealth and power. It doesn't even take wealth and power, but those guardrails are always violated. And you really see through this docuseries how it really does span this, sometimes there isn't healing. Sometimes that's why these voices are so important to watch. And you're dead on them, like their faces. You can read every reaction. And I don't know how, as filmmakers, you guys do this kind of work, because I just don't know, like even watching this, it stayed with me the rest of my day into the night. This morning, I had a bad dream about it. And no, sorry. I'm a wussy too. Like, I just want to leave, but like, it stuck with me. And I just, even for the people listening, break this up a little bit, because it's a lot. And that's why it is, I think, done in episode format. Take your time with this, but it is, I think that's why it's important work when you're, how do you deal with this? Because you guys deal with a lot of dark topics that show the realities of the world. How do you decompress from all of this, or how do you find joy in your work when it does highlight some of the darker elements of life?
Yeah, it's a question I often get. For me, part of my satisfaction or part of the reason why I do this work is to expose these places where abuse is happening, where power is being abused, give people a platform to tell their story, to speak out, whether it's this or whether I've done a lot of historical documentaries as well, looking at injustices that were covered up and buried, and that knowing that that's my contribution to society gives me some level of satisfaction and motivation to continue. But yes, it's very difficult. And hearing these stories, doing these interviews, being in those interviews was painful. I mean, I cannot tell a lie,
God, thank God you weren't like, it was a lot of fun, we had a great time. Like, no, you should. That's exactly how I would imagine you would feel.
And it was, and they were taking us on their story. And some of these were very, very painful, as you mentioned.
Emma, does it take like extreme curiosity to do what you do? Like, is that part of, I think, the magic in the projects you've been involved with? Does it start with just being curious about something? Like, and how is it like to have journalistic standards where you're like, we've got to look into this, like I can't go in with completely preconceived notions, but for somebody like Diddy, there's so much that it's so hard to not come in with preconceived notions at this point. What is like the biggest strength that you have doing the work that you do?
Well, I think it's knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and separating where you have those questions to sort of get to that. And I think, for people who've been through something traumatic, it's not vetting their story is not about doubting them. I think they want to be believed, is what I found when someone's ready to speak out, and they want you to talk to other people to verify that they talk to them or they corroborate with them, because they've been holding on this sense that people won't believe them. And so, I think I have not really found resistance really, because I think that is also just important. If someone is at a point where they want to share, they also want to know that, people are going to believe them and they're ready to open their book.
So
it's not always easy. But,
yeah. So, but you provide that safe space for people to actually feel comfortable or starting to feel comfortable to tell the truth and to be believed, which is, I mean, by the way, at this point, we have now just people lining up. And I imagine after this docuseries, there are going to be way more people lining up with stories through the decades. The other thing I was thinking about in terms of you bring up Kim Porter, who was with Diddy and has kids with Diddy. She's unfortunately passed away, and there's a lot of mystery around that. But also like the J-Lo stuff, he was dating J-Lo. He was with Kim Porter at the same time. And I was like, wait a sec, how did that happen? Like they were in the public, and like that was just a thing where he went after J-Lo really hard, even though he was with Kim. They would be in the same spaces, but they wouldn't be on top of each other. I was so confused by that, but that was just like Diddy being Diddy. Like he fully had Kim Porter and was with Kim Porter, but he was also with J-Lo.
Yes, that's what it appears to be.
Yeah.
Who knows what kind of, agreements, conversations, they had, but yes, that is how he operated.
I'm so curious if J-Lo will ever make a statement about this period of her life. She was just at the Sundance Film Festival this past weekend with Kiss of the Spider Woman. And, I think a lot of us are so curious about her time with Diddy. And I mean, listen, you have archival footage of like Ashton Kutcher at these parties, like swinging on ropes. And you remember when they had this period of time when they were all dressing in three-piece suits and showing up to award shows and basketball games together. And it was these kind of friendlier memories that you had at the time that in retrospect, you look back and going like, what did they experience? What are their stories? And I'm so curious if they will ever feel comfortable enough to enter that fray, or if it's too much of a risk to their public persona.
Well, what do you think?
I think we already are seeing the answer. I think we will never potentially hear. And obviously, well, you just said the story's unfolding. We had like Jay-Z accusations being brought into it, and he is now heavily litigating all of this. Like it is so vast. But just through, like, you have his publicists, you have people that have worked with him at Revolt TV. I mean, like explains that he was a $1 billion man with Diageo, like Ciroc, all of these companies that he had built up and kept making money. This was like at one point he was a 25-year-old multimillionaire, and you can't even imagine what that does to your head. But it always seemed to be the same playbook, is like, get somebody that like he was obsessed with, kind of remake them in a Svengali way, and then find another person of interest, get really dark with them eventually, and then apologize and say he was going through dark days and that he was doing better. So it seemed to be this pattern. And were there any people in these talking heads that still believe in Diddy and believing Diddy can be rehabbed in any sort of way, that sort of empathized with him in any sense?
I think there is empathy towards him, even people who are disgusted and horrified. There's still empathy, I remember one interviewee said, he still is a father. He's a son. He has a family. How do the children, what's their experience? How do they feel about what he's going through? So I think there's a way you can have two things be held at the same time, of feeling empathy and hoping for some kind of redemption, while also still being horrified, and shocked and saddened about what this man, has done.
Where do you go from here? I mean, like I said, like this 4-part thing ended and it is ongoing. Are you already in the works for a follow-up? And I don't know if I'm allowed to ask that, but I would imagine things are unfolding and it seems like new pieces are not necessarily falling into place, but new pieces are always coming out. Would you be open to doing a follow-up? Because I have a suspicion that this will really pique the public's interest all over again. Are you already hard at work on part 2 of this?
We are always interested in following stories forward. So, We'll see.
I'm going to say yes. Then we'll go yes. No. I just think it needs to be handled delicately, which this did. And so I was like, I would be so curious what your thoughts are on this next phase of where we go from here and how he's fighting this time, because you make a point of every time these lawsuits would happen, they would also go away. The public would forget all of these things. And this time, I don't know how you make that piece go away. He has the best lawyers. He is obviously going to fight tooth and nail because this guy is a fighter. But I wonder what his mental status is at this time. We just hear rumors and secondhand accounts. And I would love to see, I feel like he should be forced to watch things like this, to face his victims, even if it's through a TV screen, to see what he has done to them. Because it's not just about putting a song in our hearts, but what you did to people's minds that actually knew you in the flesh.
Absolutely. Yeah. Who knows? We don't know what he's watching or able to watch. He could be.
Yeah. So 4 parts, we break this down, 2 parts each night. Was there anything that you had to leave on the cutting room floor for this 4 parts? Is that okay to ask? Was there anything that you had to let go? Because it's exhaustive, but I imagine there was still avenues that you went down you couldn't air.
Always.
always, even like whole interviews that didn't land. Yeah,
totally. And even, I think as as we mentioned, things were unfolding. So we were, deep into production when the Cassie video came out, then the arrest. And so that, shaped what we could what we could include and what we had to trim. We also have time limits, obviously. So we have to, be within those limitations. And the fact that it was unfolding really, really shaped, what we had to leave on the cutting room floor.
Going back to your first question, you said, okay, you start with Cassie, but then it goes far back. And I think this was a discussion that we spent many an hour on. How do you tell a story that is also unfolding, that many people think they know, but knowing what we know, we felt, well, there's a lot more to it. And, part of the thinking there is we wanted to bring you into something that you understood. Many people have heard about Cassie, heard about the allegations and her lawsuit, but then sort of roll us back and then take us through stories that you think you understood. And so, that was ultimately kind of where we landed, but that wasn't necessarily how we thought of it immediately in the beginning, because we began to see how integral her lawsuit was to so many other people.
Well, and the interesting thing was that you said what really set Cassie off, and this kind of wheels in motion for Cassie to come forward, was at the award show when he's accepting an award. And he says, even though they've been split for months, he said, thank you to Cassie for holding me down. I was in a really dark place out of nowhere. They had been broken up. And I believe you guys said that was the thing that set Cassie off to actually file her lawsuit. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I want to give credit to Rolling Stone, to the great reporters Cheyenne and Nancy there. They had sort of found that out in their reporting in their article. And, that was revelatory to us and an important kind of point on that storyline that we thought was really important to include and help people understand.
Yeah, and Cheyenne, amazing reporter for Rolling Stone. She's a talking head in this as well. But it was interesting to watch that lawsuit happen. They settle it with, I believe, within 2 days. And then Diddy has a video he posts to IG of I'm still standing, dancing to Elton John's song. And then the video gets leaked by CNN. And then he does the apology video. And, all of these things start just kind of falling into place. If you were to, you're not in the speculation business, but at this point, I just don't see. There is just no way that I think he can get around. I don't know. The only thing I can think of is, there's photos with Trump, maybe a presidential pardon. But other than that, I don't see how you get out of where he is at this moment. Would you tend to agree, or is that something you can't speculate on?
Well, I think there's, all kinds of possibilities. And you mentioned some, and we'll have to see.
Yeah. There was a photo, as we start winding down here, there was a photo shoot in Vibe magazine, I think in 1997, I think it was Vibe, with him in angel wings. And, the Danielle Smith, who you speak with as a talking head, the editor-in-chief at Vibe, they didn't have a practice of showing the cover or the story to any artist that they featured. Like that was just, it wasn't a thing. It was just, they put out a magazine, they write the article, they do. So this happens, and Diddy, they're like, no, we can't show you. And Diddy threatens Danielle, actually comes with two tough guys down to the office. She wasn't there, but threatens to like get rid of her if he couldn't see the article and this. And by the way, I mean, it's like Angel Wings. You're on the cover. Like, I don't think it was like a hit piece on Diddy, but he was so obsessed that she has to be like ushered, like taken out, like with a team away from the offices because her life had been threatened. And he had to fax over an apology, which took a long time to get. But like, she even like in telling the story, she's blacked it out. Like, she was so traumatized by the incident, she doesn't remember being ushered out. Because imagine your life being threatened at Vibe magazine. You're doing your job. You put a superstar on the cover and you're getting threatened for your life because you won't show Diddy the picture of him in Angel Wings.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And again, the trauma is still there many years later. You're doing, as you said, you're doing your job. You're the first woman editor of Vibe magazine. Again, 1997, these things were not common at that time. And to be threatened by one of the most powerful people in the music industry.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying this thing is exhaustive. There are so many stories that we're not going to be able to get through today, but it's just account after account, from Howard University to Uptown Records when he gets the internship with Andre Harrell, who was his mentor, to him getting fired, to him putting the beat behind Mary J. Blige's song. I mean, like, there are so many moments of like, you want to like their victory, celebration of Biggie, of all of these things, and they all end, or they all like, with the further context, it all is just so dark, and you can only speculate what was going through this kid's mind, or if he was just thinking about the kid that got like bullied, on his streets as a kid. Like, you just kind of keep wondering what he was actually thinking through this time. It just seemed like this weird domino situation. Also, there were, you guys didn't get into the Wendy Williams of it all, like when he had threatened her. Like, it was just the same playbook time and time again that he did. Yoruba, I was just thinking too, because you had talked about Black culture specifically, how does this affect overall? Because this is a story that should be about Black excellence. This should be about the heights that you can rise to. And now it is like it's highlighting this other side of it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's very painful. I think it's very painful for the community at large, for the Black community, for the African-American community. It's painful for those who are hip hop fans and hip hop lovers, which obviously is not just the Black community. It's painful to have all that music, all that culture, which shaped so many people, be tainted by these experiences. And to have someone that so many people, as we say, as they say in the series, who looked up to him, who were so happy to work for him, who wanted to emulate him, to then experience what they experience and experience his abuse of power. And it's very hard, even for those who didn't, work for him, for people at large, because again, we don't have many. We have fewer of the billionaires, fewer of the moguls. And we all, root for them when we see them achieve what they achieve, because, they're part of us. So it's very, very hard and painful. And I think that's why you still have many people, as you said, there are many people who are now convinced that about what kind of man he is, but there's still a lot of people who don't want to believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about the part where you were talking about like the Juicy, like Biggie's there rapping Juicy. It was all, like it was like this big moment, but the video is them partying, them living a higher life, him talking about the streets, but also then projecting this image to white kids like me growing up in Kansas, never hearing music like this before. So he brought it to like, just the culture at large, or created the culture that was already pre-existing or that he was already involved in. And that is, that's what he was celebrated for. What do you hope that people take away that watch all four parts of this? what is your intention when you go into this that you hope people will receive from it or walk away with?
Emma, you want to start?
I'll start this one, yes. Well, look, I think, well, we tell a very specific story about Sean Combs, Puffy, Diddy, whatever name you want to use. I think fundamentally his story is an American story about power, what can happen with power, and the tragedy of that power.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, I hope that there's the actions that Combs allegedly did, but there's also us as a society, what we accepted in terms of, as we talked about, watching the making of the band and seeing that kind of abusive behavior, but still watching in terms of not shaming victims, not believing stories. Everyone deserves their day in court, absolutely, but we have to, hear what people are saying and hear their experiences, and not denigrate, dismiss, ignore. And I hope that people will take that from this as well.
That's it exactly. If you look at all of this as like a giant piece, of like his actual career and then these victim stories, you see like I always talk about the pendulum swinging, it can swing really high one way, but you've got to accept that it's going to swing the other way. And you want to be, and you guys provided just the best experience for these people to share their stories. And that's why I really highly recommend this to everybody. I think, if you're a fan of Diddy, if you were a fan of Diddy, I think it is very important. And I think it honors, all of the people that he has worked with or harmed or even championed through the years. I mean, this is just, but it's still a story unfolding. So I'm very interested to see where this goes and where your work goes with it. I was doing research and I just forgot that like in 2017 I went to the 20th anniversary of Bad Boy concert at the Forum in Los Angeles. And my ex had been, grew up in New York and was a huge fan of Bad Boy. And I remember going there and it was such a celebration that night. And like Diddy and Dre and Snoop showed up even, and that was like this East Coast West Coast moment, and they had Mary J. Blige out there, they had Mace out there, and I just thought, wow, I'm hearing like a little piece of history, not even thinking for a second, which is so dumb of me, that there was all this evidence already out there in the public eye. So I don't know what that means for us as consumers, that we have to be more wary of who we look up to and who we follow. But I don't know, this presents such interesting questions, and thank you both for your work. Is there anything coming up that we can support you with after the fall of Diddy?
Well, I would just say, Maxine Productions, which is doing incredible amount of work right now, that there's other series that are looking at, abuses of power that are very powerful as well.
And you're going to dip into Lively Baldoni? I'm joking.
We always have a bunch of stuff in, that we're stirring up, but check out the website of Maxine Productions.
I'll put that in the show notes, you guys. Phenomenal. They do phenomenal work, so I'll put that there as well. Emma, I'm sure you agree with everything Yoruba just said.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your work. This was very, very powerful. And I'm sure you're exhausted because it can't be a lot of fun to talk about this over and over and over again. But I hope that you are, there's some satisfaction in just doing good work. And I don't know if there's any excitement in seeing how the public will react to this, but I would imagine you'd be really curious.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And thank you for highlighting it, because I think, as you add to the conversation, hopefully people learn more of what we're trying to bring to the table and, hear those stories firsthand. So,
well, that's what I'm saying. Like Quiet on Set, we're really shining a light on some really incredible stories that I think are just going to have ramifications for decades and decades to come, which is such a positive thing as we leave. So, Emma and Yoruba, thank you so much. I hope I get a chance to talk to you again someday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise.